Leviticus chapter 7. The sacrifice to make things right is very sacred. The animal must be killed in the same place where the sacrifice to please me is killed, and the animal's blood must be splattered against the four sides of the bronze altar. Offer all of the animal's fat, including the fat on its tail and on its insides, as well as the lower part of the liver and the two kidneys with their fat. One of the priests will lay these pieces on the altar and send them up in smoke to me. This sacrifice for making things right is very holy. Only the priests may eat it, and they must eat it in a holy place. The ceremony of this sacrifice and the one for sin are just alike, and the meal may be eaten only by the priest who performs the ceremony of forgiveness. In fact, the priest who offers a sacrifice to please me may keep the skin of the animal, just as he may eat the bread from a sacrifice to give thanks to me. All other grain sacrifices with or without olive oil in them are to be divided equally among the priests of Aaron's family. Here are the instructions for offering a sacrifice to ask my blessing. If you offer it to give thanks, you must offer some bread together with it. Use the finest flour to make 3 kinds of bread without yeast, 2 in the form of loaves mixed with olive oil, and the one in the form of thin wafer brushed with oil. You must also make some bread with yeast. Give me 1 loaf or wafer from each of these 4 kinds of bread. After which they will belong to the priest who splattered the blood against the bronze altar. When you offer an animal to ask a blessing from me or to thank me, the meat belongs to you, but it must be eaten the same day. It is different with the sacrifices you offer when you make me a promise or voluntarily give me something. The meat from those sacrifices may be kept and eaten the next day, but any that is left must be destroyed. If you eat any after the second day, your sacrifice will be useless and unacceptable, and you will be both disgusting and guilty. Don't eat any of the meat that touches something unclean. Instead, burn it. The rest of the meat may be eaten by anyone who is clean and acceptable to me. But don't eat any of this meat if you have become unclean by touching something unclean from a human or an animal or from any other creature. If you do, you will no longer belong to the community of Israel. The Lord told Moses to say to the people, "Don't eat the fat of cattle, sheep, or goats. If one of your animals dies or is killed by some wild animal, you may do anything with its fat except eat it. If you eat the fat of an animal that can be used as a sacrifice to me, you will no longer belong to the community of Israel. And no matter where you live, you must not eat the blood of any bird or animal, or you will no longer belong to the community of Israel." The Lord also told Moses to say to the people of Israel, "If you want to offer a sacrifice to ask my blessing, you must bring the part to be burned and lay it on the bronze altar. But you must first lift up the choice ribs with their fat to show that the offering is dedicated to me. A priest from Aaron's family will then send the fat up in smoke, but the ribs belong to the priests. The upper joint of the right hind leg is for the priest who offers the blood and the fat of the animal. I have decided that the people of Israel must always give the choice ribs and the I have decided that the people of Israel must always give the choice ribs and the upper joint of the right hand leg to Aaron's descendants who have been ordained as priests to serve me. This law will never change. I am the Lord. These are the ceremonies for sacrifices to please the Lord, to give him thanks and to ask his blessing or his forgiveness, as well as the ceremonies for those sacrifices that demand a payment and for the sacrifices that are offered when priests are ordained. While Moses and the people of Israel were in the desert at Mount Sinai, the Lord commanded them to start offering these sacrifices. Leviticus chapter 8. The Lord said to Moses, "Send for Aaron and his sons, as well as their priestly clothes, the oil for ordination, the bull for the sin offering, the 2 rams, and a basket of bread made without yeast. Then bring the whole community of Israel together at the entrance to the sacred tent." Moses obeyed the Lord, and when everyone had come together, he said, "We are here to follow the Lord's instructions." After Moses told Aaron and his sons to step forward, he had them wash themselves. He put the priestly shirt and robe on Aaron and wrapped the sash around his waist. Then he put the sacred vest on Aaron and fastened it with finely woven belt. Next, he put on Aaron the sacrificed breastpiece that was used in learning what the Lord wanted his people to do. He placed the turban on Aaron's head, and on the front of the turban was a narrow strip of thin gold as a sign of his dedication to the Lord. Moses then dedicated the sacred tent and everything in it to the Lord by sprinkling them with some of the oil for ordination. He sprinkled the bronze altar 7 times, and he sprinkled its equipment as well as the large bronze bowl and its base. He also put some of the oil on Aaron's head to dedicate him to the Lord. At last, Moses dressed Aaron's sons in their shirts, then tied sashes around them and put special caps on them, just as the Lord had commanded. Moses led out the bull that was to be sacrificed for sin, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head. After it was killed, Moses dipped a finger in the blood and smeared some of it on each of the 4 corners of the bronze altar. Before pouring out the rest at the foot of the altar, they purified the altar and made it a fit place for offering the sacrifice for sin. Moses then took the fat on the bull's inside as well as the lower part of the liver and the 2 kidneys with their fat, and sent them up in smoke on the altar fire. Finally, he took the skin and the flesh of the bull, together with the food still in its stomach, and burned them outside the camp, just as the Lord had commanded. Moses led out the ram for the sacrifice to please the Lord after Aaron and his sons had laid their hands on its head. Moses killed the ram and splattered its blood against the 4 sides of the altar. Moses had the animal cut up, and he washed its inside and hind legs. Then he laid the head, the fat, and the rest of the ram on the altar and sent them up in smoke with a smell that pleased the Lord. All this was done just as the Lord had commanded. Moses led out the ram for the ceremony of ordination. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head, and it was killed. Moses smeared some of its blood on Aaron's right earlobe. Moses led out ram of the ceremony of ordination. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on it, and it was killed. Moses smeared some of the blood on Aaron's right earlobe, some of his right thumb, and some of the big toe of his right foot. Moses did the same thing for Aaron's sons before splattering the rest of the blood against the 4 sides of the altar. He took the animal's fat tail, the fat on its inside, and the lower part of the liver, and the 2 kidneys, and with their fats, and the right hind leg. Then he took from a basket some of each of the 3 kinds of bread that had been made without yeast and had been dedicated to the Lord. Moses placed the bread on top of the meat and gave it all to Aaron and his sons, who lifted it up to show that it was dedicated to the Lord. After this, Moses placed it on the fires of the altar and sent it up in smoke with a smell that pleased the Lord. This was part of the ordination ceremony. Moses lifted up the choice ribs of the ram to show that they were dedicated to the Lord. This was the part that the Lord had said Moses could have Finally, Moses sprinkled the priestly clothes of Aaron and his sons with some of the oil for ordination and with some of the blood from the altar. So Aaron and his sons, together with their priestly clothes, were dedicated to the Lord. Moses said to Aaron and his sons, "The Lord told me that you must boil this meat at the entrance to the sacred tent and eat it there with the bread. Burn what is left over. and stay near the entrance to the sacred tent until the ordination ceremony ends 7 days from now. We have obeyed the Lord in everything that has been done today, so that your sins may be forgiven. The Lord has told me that you must stay near the entrance to the tent for 7 days and nights, or else you will die. Aaron and his sons obeyed everything that the Lord had done Moses they must do. Leviticus chapter 9. 8 days later, Moses called together Aaron, his sons, and Israel's leaders. Then he said to Aaron, "Find a young bull and a ram that have nothing wrong with them. Offer the bull to the Lord as a sacrifice for sin, and the ram as a sacrifice to please him. Tell the people of Israel that they must offer sacrifices as well. They must offer a goat as a sacrifice for sin, and a bull and a ram as a sacrifice to please the Lord. The bull and the ram must be a year old and have nothing wrong with them. Then the people must offer a bull and a ram as a sacrifice to ask the Lord's blessing, and also a grain sacrifice mixed with oil. Do this because the Lord will appear to you today." After the animals and the grain had been brought to the front of the sacred tent, and the people were standing there in the presence of the Lord, Moses said, "The Lord has ordered you to do this, so that he may appear to you in all of his glory." Aaron stepped up to the altar and offered the sacrifice to please the Lord. Then offer the sacrifices for the forgiveness of your sins and for the sins of the people, just as the Lord has commanded. Aaron stepped up to the altar and killed the bull that was to be sacrificed for his sins. His sons brought him the blood. He dipped a finger in it, smeared some on the four corners of the bronze altar, and poured out the rest at its foot. But he sent up in smoke the fat, the kidneys, and the lower part of the liver, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Then Aaron burned the skin and the flesh outside the camp. After Aaron had killed the ram that was sacrificed to please the Lord, Aaron's sons brought him the blood. He splattered it against all four sides of the altar. They brought him each piece of the animal, including the head, and he burned them all on the altar. He washed the insides and the hind legs, and also sent them up in smoke. Next, Aaron sacrificed the goat for the sins of the people, and as he had done with the sacrifice for his own sins, and so he burned the sacrifice on the altar in the proper way. He also presented the grain sacrifice and burned a handful of the flour on the altar as part of the morning sacrifice. At last he killed the bull and the ram as a sacrifice to ask the Lord's blessing on the people. Aaron's sons brought him the blood, and he splattered it against the four sides of the altar. His sons placed all the fat as well as the kidneys and the lower part of the liver on the top of the choice ribs. Then Aaron burned the fat on the altar and lifted up the ribs and the right hind legs, to show that these were dedicated to the Lord. This was done just as the Lord had instructed Moses. Aaron held out his hand and gave the people his blessing. Before coming down from the bronze altar, where he had offered the sacrifices, he and Moses went into the sacred tent, and when they came out, they gave the people their blessing. Then the Lord appeared to the people in all of his glory. The Lord sent fiery flames that burned up everything on the altar, and when everyone saw this, they shouted and fell on their knees to worship the Lord.